Alright, so I've had a bit of interest in how to pretty much disassemble the graphics card and reapply thermal paste to the GPU and the memory banks. This is a nvidia card. So these cards are known for having issues with artifacting. And what happens is that the not unlike the PS3 actually, when the card gets really hot, the solder will actually melt and or it'll soften and it'll start to lift off the PCB. In a normal tower, the card sits upside down like this, and that's part of the issue. So when it goes into the oven, it goes upside down like this. So I suppose just quickly before I start, one thing to note is that the reason why you would need to do this is because maybe at one time you turn the computer on and you're getting artifacting on the screen. So that's one of the main reasons for doing this. You'll find that you're getting white lines on the screen, or it's doing it intermittently, or the card just stops working completely. Okay, so the tools you'll need a pair of pliers. You also need either a Phillips head or a Torx screwdriver, depending on the card. You'll need, like tissues. You'll need thermal paste, and you'll more than likely need to get thermal pads as well, of the 1mm type. So thermal pads are needed because the gaps between the RAM and the heatsink are more than what's bridgeable by thermal paste. So thermal paste is used for the GPU, which sits in here, and the thermal pads are used for the RAM. So the first thing that needs to be done is you need to remove the bracket from the card, this bracket here. So for starters, there's usually these screws here, which are used for the DVI connector usually. If you pull these out, because they also work as a screw to hold in the bracket there. And you'll also see that there's usually extra screws, so you can see that we've got a screw there as well, so that will need to come out too. Okay, so once you've removed the screws and the sort of adapter screws from this bracket here, it should start to loosen up, and that's all that you need to do on the back of the card. Sometimes there's screws on the edge here. I know that the 4 series and the 5 series does, but this one doesn't have anything like that. You can see on the ends there's nothing there. So you need to start removing screws. So all of the screws here with a spring underneath them. So that one, 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 that one. They all hold in the heatsink. So the reasoning for the spring is so when you sort of tap on the screw sort of halfway, it's always got constant pressure on the heatsink. So they are done up tight. The spring's only there so that the heatsink sort of stays on the GPU while you're screwing it in. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove every screw that isn't a heatsink one. So we're just having a bit of a closer look at the PCB here. If it wants to focus. So you can see the board there. So that's the GPU in the center there. The small screws surround the GPU there. Most of the nvidia cards are very similar, but they may have a different, they might not use a Phillips head, sometimes they use a different type of head on the screws. So you can see there, you can see all the screws there. It's important to do this in a star shape, so you sort of do one side, then you do the next side, and then you do there, then you do there, then you do there, then there, and there and there. Okay, so now we've removed all the screws. If we're lucky, it will all start to pull apart. So I'm going to turn it over and try and lever it open. And it's not moving yet, so let's see. I've got one more screw down here. Get a plier. Oops. Okay, so this is a pry tool, and it's not budging yet. Let's see. It's just a matter of finding where all the clips are and all the screw holes are. So this particular card I've not done before, but it can't be too difficult. So we've got quite a bit of friction right about here. Okay, you can see now that the whole board is wiggling about, so the only thing holding it in is thermal paste and thermal glue, so it's okay to lever. And there we go. So unplug the fan, and this is a heatsink for there we go, these little modules down here. Okay, so now we've got the heatsink. This is the heatsink, and that's the card there. Now we've got the heatsink separated from the actual card. What you need to do is move this out of the way. Move this into the picture. Now this really needs to be cleaned up, so these here are thermal pads. The other thermal pads for the other RAM chips are still sitting on the heatsink, so some of them just stay here. But they're actually a pad, and they're about, I don't know if that's in the picture, but they're about a millimetre thick, a little bit thicker than a millimetre thick. And you can see the difference between that and what's on the actual GPU here. It's actually a paste. You can see it's actually got, it gets quite hot. You can see the difference between the middle and the outside. It's almost gone crusty. Still kind of soft there, but you would expect it to be a little bit softer than that. And it looks like that's the PhysX chip there on this card. You can see that, it's got a second little chip down there, which has a little thermal pad that looks like just sits on it, like that. Okay, so at this point you need to remove everything off the card. So when I say everything, you need to remove everything. Any plastic, see these plastics here, they just slide off. The bracket needs to come off completely, so there's just one more screw just down there that needs to come off. You can see it pivoting on it there. All of the thermal pads need to come off. You can attempt to reuse the thermal pads, but you can see that they do get quite dusty. So if you try and reuse them, then you need to make sure that there's no dust between the heatsink and the chip. This needs to be cleaned off. You can just use a clean tissue, or you can sometimes use like some form of alcohol to get it off, but a tissue works fine. Nothing drastic. It just needs to be cleaned off because it will get hot in there. Just make sure that everything's clean. So once you've got all the thermal pads off, it looks like that underneath. Then you can just get a cloth, is better than a tissue, and just clean it, because a tissue will leave bits of tissue all over the board. Okay, so if you remember from before, the way that this sits in the computer is actually upside down. So what you want to do is you want to heat it in the oven this way. So hopefully the oven's been preheated, so it's sitting at 200 degrees. I've heard that it's better to actually put this in the oven, turn it to 200 degrees, and let it slowly heat up the card all the way through. The problem with that is you don't really know how long it's been in there for, because you don't want to have it cooking for too long, obviously. This GPU doesn't like to sit at 200 degrees, obviously, so I like to just heat it up to 200 degrees or 195 degrees. Stick it in there, leave it for about, looking at about 7 to 8 minutes. At about the 8-minute mark, if you look closely while it's in the oven, you will see some of the solder start to melt. And when it starts to melt, it sort of starts to change colour a little bit. Like you'll see it get a little bit sparkly. So these power headers here, they've got some nice big solder blocks on them there. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 you can look at the base of. If you look at the base of those, as soon as they melt, as soon as you start to see them get shiny and melted, turn the oven off and pull the card out. You need to be very careful with the card. Obviously when the card's hot and the solder's melted, if you knock something, it'll just move off the card and you'll just destroy the card. So you need to put the card on a pan. So you get a pan with aluminium foil on it. You get probably 4 aluminium foil sheets and scrunch them up into a ball and put them underneath the card, so the card's sort of resting about an inch off the surface. You use aluminium foil because the heat won't go through the aluminium to the card, and you won't get hot spots. So you have it sitting there, put the card in. Once you see the solder start to melt after about 7 minutes, turn the oven off and pull it out, very, very gently. Don't touch the card because it's going to be hot, but just pull it out very, very gently, and then just place it to the side. Still sitting on the aluminium foil. Just move the pan out and just sit it to the side and let it rest for about half an hour. Once you've let it rest for half an hour, it's just a matter of applying thermal paste to the card, putting new thermal pads on all of the chips, and basically putting all the screws back together. Once you've put the card back together, then it should just, you know, if you're lucky, it should have solved your issue. So, like I said, I've done this to a few cards before and it's worked fine. So, yeah, it's a really good thing to try. I mean, if the card's playing up and it's unusable, there's no harm in trying this. And like I said, you get good use out of the card once you've done this. So this could probably apply to different things as well. There's no reason why it wouldn't apply to like a motherboard or you know, an ATI card or any other sort of PCB with a similar sort of issue. But I'm not going to say that it's the thing to do. I know that it works on these cards, so that's why I've made this tutorial. So that's it. So you apply a thermal paste. The thing with thermal paste is just do a little dot in the middle. You'd be surprised because the tolerance between the actual GPU and the heatsink is so tight. All you got to do is put a little sort of circle in the middle, about you know, the size of a 5-cent piece. Not even, smaller than that, probably half the size of that. Little dot in the middle, and when you put the heatsink on, it'll just flatten down onto the whole GPU. So, and that's it. Once you've done that, put it back together, stick it in the computer, should be all good to go. Alright, thanks for watching.